Secret of Heaven. Declaration to the entire human race. Preface. I am Dae-Do-Dae-Han Risa, the author. I am a prayer practitioner, unaffiliated with any religion, who prays with faith in the new heaven. Additionally, I am a spiritual seeker, learning the heavenly Tao and fighting to defeat the evil spirit. As a pathfinder and a messenger, I strive to convey and inform others accurately of what I have come to know. 36 years ago, when I began praying and practicing Tao, it was revealed to me that, in the history of heaven, there had been the creation heaven era of the Holy Spirit, followed by the betrayal heaven era of the evil spirit. People on this earth had been following the faith of the betrayal heaven era. Then, about 10 years later, on December 1st, 1997, the betrayal heaven era of the evil spirit was finally wiped out, and the new heaven era of the Holy Spirit began. I was there at that moment, and thus I became the one who testifies. Since the beginning of the new heaven era of the Holy Spirit 26 years ago, I have been immensely graced, blessed, and divinely gifted by the greatest heaven, having been bestowed with its righteous faith and Tao. In response, I will honor the guidance given to me and, through explanations of the world of Shin of heaven and earth, clarify the misunderstood history of the Shin and reveal how the people of this land have been greatly influenced by them. Therefore, by explaining why we are still unable to escape such Shin and presenting solutions, I aim to guide those seeking righteous faith and the Tao to the right path. Part 1. Life after death. Understanding the afterlife is essential for grasping the extensive details of the world of Shin, which I will explain next. Therefore, I will address it first. The content may be surprising and shocking, but we must face the reality of the world of Shin as it is. Section 1. Where does a person go after death? The most important aspect of existence is life and death. Since we are born into this world, we are destined to die someday. Some people believe in prophecies predicting that the apocalypse will come at some point. However, the apocalypse for an individual is indeed death. Death is feared and frightening because it represents a world that people have not yet experienced, and because one cannot be certain where death will take them. When a person dies, they begin to live in the world of Shin, commonly known as the afterlife. This realm, distinct from the heavens, is where individuals exist as Shin on earth, in the form of spirits or souls, without a physical body. Upon death, one hardly remembers their own name or past, making it difficult to define this existence, hence the term human Shin. Lacking powers or abilities, the human Shin is the weakest being in this realm. The afterlife is not simply a place where one closes their eyes and finds peace. Upon death, when a person leaves their physical body, they begin life as a Shin. The human Shin is not simply a wandering entity, as often implied by the term ghost. The human Shin appears human, but finds speaking and acting difficult It enters a state akin to amnesia, unable to discern its identity, location, or whether it is alive or dead. Those unprepared for death arrive in the afterlife like newborns, knowing nothing and helpless. Therefore, it is crucial to prepare for the afterlife while still alive. In this world, doctors and pharmacists help us recover from illness through surgery and medication. However, in the afterlife, such assistance is unavailable. A powerless human spirit finds the outside world terrifying. So, upon death, they initially tremble with fear and eventually hide within the bodies of their descendants. Confronted with the unfamiliar and frightening world of spirits, they are completely helpless and must constantly flee. When the Shin of deceased parents and ancestors who died from illnesses or accidents enter the descendants' bodies, the descendants are affected by those same illnesses and accidents, resulting in only negative influences. While some claim, "I have a guardian angel watching over me," descendants can face challenges due to the ancestor Shin residing within them. Moreover, people cannot escape the grip of their own fate, and, when this is compounded by the impact of the deceased ancestor Shin, their troubles tend to multiply. Your deceased parents might be acceptable, but the ancestor Shin, whom you have never seen, unconsciously enters your body and affects you. This is one of the reasons why people's lives are not always smooth. When alive, a person can think, speak, act, and live according to their own intentions. However, a dead person or a human Shin cannot think, speak, or act freely. They end up in a state as if their hands and feet are tightly bound, unable to do anything. For this reason, a human Shin is an entity that cannot live according to its own will. Therefore, before understanding why the life of a human Shin has become like this, and how the situation of a human Shin can be so helpless, one cannot discuss life or speak about the afterlife. People say that, no matter how hard life is, living is better than dying, and this is quite true for those who are not prepared for the afterlife. However, whether they like it or not, when a person dies, they cannot escape the world of Shin and must go there eventually. The world of Shin is divided into the heavenly Shin's world and the earthly Shin's world. Since human Shin belongs to the earthly realm, they cannot ascend to heaven. No matter how much money, power, and honor a person may have commanded, or even if they lived with nothing, at the moment of death, everyone finds themselves in the same situation. A person has no choice in the face of death, because there is no longer any opportunity available. You cannot guarantee that you have 10, 20, or 30 years of opportunities remaining, nor can you be certain that next year will definitely come for you, and that your life will be trouble-free for 100 years. People assume that tomorrow will naturally come. Hence, they do not prepare for death. Not knowing what comes after death makes it simply overwhelming and frightening. Sometimes, just the thought of dying makes one feel tense and scared. Those who do not prepare for their death while living on this earth will remain tied to it as human Shin after they die. They become ancestor Shin moving from one descendant's body to another, and living for about 500 to 1,000 years. It is hard to believe that a person who lived for less than 100 years in this world, after death, would be unable to leave this earth and become an ancestor Shin, hiding in the bodies of descendants for 5 to 10 times the length of their earthly life. The world of Shin is not, as people often say, where one goes to heaven or achieves reincarnation in paradise simply by believing in something. Your life in that world cannot be prepared by anyone else. It is solely up to you to understand and realize the fundamental principles and logic of the world of Shin, and to prepare accordingly. Therefore, it is important to keep this saying in mind. 10 months in a mother's womb is a time to prepare for the upcoming 100 years of life. Those 100 years are in turn a time to prepare for the upcoming 1,000 years of life after death in the world of Shin. A person is most honest and straightforward when facing their own death. In the face of death, where nothing more can be asserted, a person becomes solemn and introspective. However, because people do not fully understand death, they struggle desperately, fighting against the realities of today. Therefore, it is essential to develop a correct understanding of the afterlife. At the moment of death, the human Shin, retaining its physical appearance, leaves the body and becomes incorporated into the world of Shin, the afterlife. Simply put, it's similar to dreaming. While your physical body lies sleeping, you find yourself wandering around. When your physical body dies, whether you wish it or not, you must live as a human Shin, akin to how you exist in a dream. The afterlife, which begins immediately after death, is something unimaginable during life. People say that, if you live kindly and accumulate much virtue, you will go to paradise after you die. However, there is no separate world for human Shin after death. The afterlife exists, right here, on this earth. A human Shin finds it difficult to reside in a grave unless it is a good feng shui locus. Therefore, as an ancestor Shin, it has no choice but to seek out its descendants. This is not the will of the living descendants, but the choice of the ancestor Shin. Ultimately, nearly all ancestor Shin hide and live within the bodies of their descendants, because they can at least come and go within these bodies. In the world of Shin, descendants and ancestor Shin are naturally connected, as though it were a rule. Although the descendants may not be aware, the ancestor Shin knows that they are their descendants. When an ancestor Shin enters a descendant, it automatically downsizes and remains in an area within the descendant's body. The only human body that a human Shin can uniquely enter and exit is that of a descendant. A human Shin cannot sneak into the body of someone else's descendant. Everyone is born and eventually dies. Unfortunately, many are unaware of the afterlife, where they might live in despair, residing within one of their descendants' bodies. Therefore, it is essential for people to seriously focus on and awaken to their own mortality and prepare for the afterlife while still living. Being born as a human is the only blessed opportunity to prepare for the world of Shin. Therefore, life should not merely end with death. Instead, you must prepare for and welcome the start of a new life after leaving the body. While living on this earth, people go to the afterlife, unprepared for what comes after death, and thus do not realize how painful and tormenting life in the afterlife can be. The place they go to unprepared becomes hell itself. Thus, hell is not a separate place, but rather being trapped right here on this earth. In heaven, earthly justice as conceived by humans does not apply. People might say, "I lived an honest life," or "I did not commit any crimes," but heavenly laws are different from man-made laws. The justice that people speak of applies only to man-made laws. So, all standards, such as being good, not committing sins, and living virtuously, are merely criteria established by humans. Therefore, these criteria cannot be applied to heavenly laws. It is also essential to understand that man-made laws are not established by heaven. From now on, I will explain it in a way that is easier to understand. Section 2. A human Shin that exactly resembles one's own appearance. There exists a spirit that exactly mirrors a human's appearance, and this spirit is called the human Shin. While alive, the human Shin remains within the person's body. When that person dies, the Shin, which looks exactly like the person, leaves the body and becomes part of the world of Shin. The human Shin's appearance is fixed, as it was at the time of death. If a person died young, their human Shin will still look like a child, even 100 years later. If they died from an illness, their Shin retains the appearance of that illness in the world of Shin. If they died of old age, their Shin continues to appear elderly. The human Shin is directly affected by the physical changes that occur while a person is alive. As a person ages, the human Shin also ages. If a person is injured or falls ill, the human Shin is also injured or falls ill. The human Shin exists like a shadow, without any special abilities or powers as a Shin, and without any will of its own, merely staying within the body. When a person dies, their human Shin separates from their body and enters the world of Shin, marking the beginning of their afterlife. A person's life does not end with their physical life, because their human Shin continues in the world of Shin. From the perspective of descendants, this human Shin becomes an ancestor Shin. Let me explain what the lifetime memory and the lifetime memory archive are from this point. All the memories accumulated from birth to the present make up the lifetime memory, and what contains the lifetime memory is the lifetime memory archive. The lifetime memory dimly exists like a person's form, but, unlike the human Shin, it exists independently. When the human Shin leaves the body, the person dies. However, if the lifetime memory and its archive leave, the person does not die, but instead loses all their memories, resulting in amnesia. Think of it like a computer hard drive. All of our life experiences and memories are stored here. And if this archive is damaged or destroyed, we lose our memories. When a person dies, their lifetime memory and its archive, along with the human Shin, leave the body. At this time, most lifetime memories and their archives are devoured by evil Shin. If the human Shin retained their lifetime memory and its archive, it would be better at least. Since the evil Shin devour the lifetime memory and its archive, the human Shin is left without memories. It is easier to understand this by comparing it to severe dementia. Dementia is considered a heartbreaking disease. If there is a dementia patient in the family, it is hard for both the patient and the family to endure, because the patient does not have a healthy mind and cannot control themselves. When an evil Shin devours a person's lifetime memory and its archive, they can gain the person's wisdom and even transform into that person's appearance. Evil Shin can transform in this way and imitate ancestors, often deceiving those who see Shin through spiritual vision. In reality, true ancestor Shin, to avoid harm from evil Shin, almost always hide inside their descendants' bodies and never reveal themselves. Section 3. The reality of the human Shin after a person's death. The world of Shin is a realm ruled by the logic of ability and power. In the world of Shin, power comprises abilities such as Taoist magic, Taoist methods, spells, and witchcraft. The Shin, with more of these abilities, holds dominance, and the dominant Shin can rule over or harm Shin with weaker abilities. Unfortunately, human Shin are the most vulnerable beings in the world of Shin. While alive, humans are considered the lords of all creation, but after death, the situation completely changes. Lacking sharp claws or teeth, human Shin cannot contend with predatory animal Shin. The weapons they used while alive become object Shin and no longer serve as tools for the human Shin. Instead, they try to harm the human Shin. Additionally, evil Shin exploit human Shin for their own purposes. Evil Shin mercilessly kill or harm male human Shin, while they take female human Shin and use them as a means to reproduce evil Shin. For this reason, human Shin, regardless of gender, desperately try to avoid evil Shin, and most human Shin end up hiding inside the bodies of their descendants. Descendants already struggle to deal with their bad karma while living in this world. Living under the influence of the bad karma of their ancestor Shin that has entered them makes life even more difficult. But what other choice is there? They are your ancestors. You can't just drive them away. Let me elaborate on bad karma. There are relationships that have been formed over countless past lives. The actions one has taken within those relationships, whether good or bad, are called karma. The bad outcomes that come back to oneself as a result are called bad karma. This bad karma has a significant impact on one's current life. Section 4. The home of the human Shin. The original home of the human Shin is the grave. However, unless it is a good feng shui locus, it is not easy to live there, making a grave one's home a challenging task. For reference, cremation is better than burial. If a grave is improperly placed, it can bring misfortune to the family, whereas cremation prevents such issues. When a person dies, they are either buried or cremated, and their remains are placed in a tree burial site, a columbarium, or a tomb, or scattered in nature, such as in the mountains or the sea. For various reasons, human Shin that leave their burial sites often wanders in search of food and refuge, eventually finding their way into the bodies of their descendants. When a descendant eats food, the human Shin can absorb the ki from the food, alleviating hunger, and they don't have to run around evading evil Shin. Some claim that ancestors stay with their descendants as guardian angels to help them. However, given the uncertainty of their own existence, ancestor Shin do not have the time to worry about their descendants. Rather, they only harm the descendants. Consequently, people suffer from various unexplained pains or face difficulties in life, living under the negative impact of the ancestor Shin residing within their bodies. If an ancestor Shin who died of an illness resides within a descendant's body, the descendant will also contract that illness. From the ancestor Shin's perspective, they do not want to harm their descendants, but since their survival is uncertain outside of their descendants' bodies, they have no choice but to remain within them. Section 5. Food of the human Shin. Even human Shin need to eat to survive. This means human Shin consume the ki from food. If human Shin are outside their descendant's body rather than inside, they have to wander in search of food, which is not an easy task. One might think human Shin could simply go to a restaurant or market. However, every place has its own site Shin, and entering without their permission would likely result in a beating. Ultimately, entering the body of a descendant is the safest way for ancestor Shin to survive. Cold and hungry ancestor Shin can easily obtain vital ki from their descendants, enabling them to stay warm and avoid starvation. Even if an ancestor Shin somehow enters a descendant's body, it is not the only Shin present in that body. Descendants also have other evil Shin from their past lives' karma, which means there are no good places left for the human Shin. Ancestor Shin, in an effort to avoid being detected by the evil Shin, have to hide, and can only manage to sustain themselves by consuming just enough ki from the food their descendants eat to survive. Therefore, powerless human Shin always live in a constant state of hunger. Even when descendants prepare a memorial ceremony feast, the evil Shin devours it, making the lives of the human Shin truly miserable. Section 6. The clothes of the human Shin. When a person dies, if their body is not recovered due to war or an accident, the clothes they were wearing at the time become their attire in the world of Shin. In other cases, it is customary to dress the deceased in burial clothes, which become their permanent attire. While the living can choose and buy as many clothes as they want throughout their lives, the deceased must spend hundreds of years in the single set of burial clothes worn at their funeral. Section 7. A hereditary disease is, in fact, a Shin-hereditary disease. A disease passed down from ancestors to descendants is known as a hereditary disease. However, from the perspective of Shin, a hereditary disease can be termed a Shin-hereditary disease. A human Shin retains the illness they had at the time of their death. If an ancestor Shin with an illness enters a descendant, the descendant will also suffer from the same illness. For example, when I observed a woman suffering from breast cancer through spiritual vision, I found that her grandmother Shin, who had died of breast cancer, was residing in her body. A deceased ancestor Shin, who died from an illness, can enter a descendant, causing the same illness. When this afflicted descendant dies, their Shin seeks out another descendant, causing illness in that person as well. This is why I call a hereditary disease a Shin-hereditary disease. This is precisely why, when someone dies from a certain illness, other family members end up suffering from the same illness. Some might say, instead of helping their descendants, why do the ancestor Shin cause them harm? However, that is only from the perspective of the living. From the perspective of ancestor Shin, who struggle to sustain their own lives, the body of a descendant is merely a refuge. Ancestor Shin do not intend to harm their descendants, but unfortunately, the result is harmful to the descendants. Section 8. Human Shin and Ancestor Shin. The human Shin resides in a person's body and grows along with it. At the moment of death, the Shin leaves the body in the same form and is incorporated into the world of Shin, which is the afterlife. Thus, the Shin enters a world that is unimaginable in the physical world. It is commonly said that if you do a lot of good deeds, you will go to paradise or nirvana after death. However, there is no separate world after death. The world of Shin is right here, on this earth, where people live. Moreover, paradise or nirvana is not a place one can enter through personal good deeds done in this world. Even if someone has done many good deeds, it remains the same. However, those who have committed evil deeds will pay for all their wrongdoings during their lifetime. Once a person leaves this world, even if they were a king, from that moment on, their grave becomes the home of that deceased person, or the human Shin. However, unless the grave is in a good feng shui locus, it is difficult for the human Shin to live there. So, they leave to find their descendants. This is not the will of the descendants, but the choice of the ancestor Shin. Therefore, even distant ancestor Shin, whom the descendants have never heard of, come to them. When the ancestor Shin enters their descendants, the descendants begin to be affected in a tangible way. What is called a hereditary disease actually means that descendants are suffering from the same illness due to the impact of an ancestor Shin who died from the disease. When a person dies from an illness, they continue to exist in that state in the world of Shin. When an ancestor Shin with an illness enters the body of a descendant, some families can inherit diseases for which the name and treatment are unknown. The emotional suffering from guilt and longing for the deceased also occurs because the ancestor Shin remains in the body, causing both physical and mental effects simultaneously. Unfortunately, ancestor Shin are present in the bodies of all people. Since the lifespan of a human Shin is approximately 500 to 1,000 years, it is a reality that many ancestor Shin from multiple generations reside in one descendant. Therefore, who can confidently say that there is no ancestor Shin within their body? Section 9. How can a person be saved? How the dead and the living are saved differs for each. The dead can be saved through ancestor ceremonies requested by their descendants. The living must have their human Shin reborn as a holy Shin, conceived with the holy young through righteous prayers and the practice of Tao. How the living can be saved will be explained in the following parts. The crucial point is that the living must make an effort to seek salvation themselves. In this part, I will explain only the solution for the salvation of the dead. Section 10. Ancestor Ceremony for the salvation of ancestor Shin. Everyone has ancestors. From one's deceased parents to previous generations, all become ancestors. Your current existence is possible because of these ancestors. Even though ancestors are no longer alive, their existence has not completely disappeared because they continue to live as human Shin after shedding their physical bodies. Ancestor Shin carry their bad karma and illnesses from their lifetimes and mostly reside within their descendants. This means that the bad karma and illnesses of the ancestor Shin are passed down to their descendants. For example, if an ancestor Shin who lost or injured an arm or leg in a war or accident resides within a descendant, that descendant is likely to frequently injure their arms or legs as well. If there is an ancestor Shin who died of starvation, the descendant will feel hungry, no matter how much they eat. If an ancestor Shin with a liver disease resides within a descendant, that descendant will also develop a liver disease. When a person dies from illness or an accident, their human Shin remains in the same diseased or injured state. Moreover, not only do ancestor Shin reside within a person's body, but evil Shin also dwell there, causing many harmful effects. Due to the evil Shin, people may experience sleep paralysis, suffer from illnesses, or encounter accidents, causing much pain and disruption in their lives. Evil Shin can even possess people. Therefore, although I continuously work to deal with evil Shin, ancestor Shin often reside in the descendants' bodies alongside the evil Shin. As a result, while dealing with the evil Shin, the ancestor Shin can also be harmed, making it difficult to properly address the issue. Ancestor Shin, who already have nowhere to go and lack strength, reside in their descendants' bodies. In situations where ancestor Shin might be harmed or even die, I cannot disregard their existence under the pretext of dealing with evil Shin. In some cases, a ritual is performed to summon these ancestor Shin and ask them to leave the descendant's body and go to a better place. However, those performing this ritual often inadvertently expel the ancestor Shin from the descendant's body without knowing where the Shin will go to live. Even if the expelled ancestor Shin temporarily go elsewhere, they may return and cause even greater harm to their descendants out of resentment. The descendants may have requested such a ritual with good intentions, but ultimately it harms the ancestor Shin. Anyone who wants to practice righteous faith must resolve the issue of ancestor Shin within their body. Although they may not intend to hinder their descendants, if ancestor Shin reside within the descendants' bodies, the descendants inherit the Shin's bad karma, making it impossible to achieve righteous faith, no matter how hard they try. However, you cannot simply expel or deal with them indiscriminately, nor can you ignore them, so you inevitably have to endure the turmoil caused by the negative influence of the ancestor Shin. Some people call ancestor Shin evil spirits. If ancestor Shin are evil spirits, does that mean they are the descendants of evil incarnate? Unfortunately, the number of ancestor Shin could be many. Even if you have somehow sent off one or two ancestor Shin from your body, you cannot say that you have completely become free from their influence. This is because ancestor Shin also reside within the bodies of family members, so another ancestor Shin can enter at any time. Therefore, all direct ancestor Shin must be summoned simultaneously and sent to a safe place. Only then can you and your family completely become free from the grip of the ancestor Shin. Moreover, the unborn baby Shin must be resolved along with the ancestor Shin. Whether it was an abortion or a natural miscarriage, the Shin remain in the mother's womb. They believe they were killed and exist in the womb, filled with resentment and a desire for revenge. Therefore, the unborn baby Shin are frightening. Consequently, most women who have experienced an abortion or miscarriage develop uterine diseases. What's worse, the unborn baby Shin can bring misfortune to the family, prevent future births, or torment a new fetus, leading to another miscarriage. Even if a baby is born, their life will not be smooth due to the unborn baby Shin's envy and jealousy. This is why the Shin of the aborted or miscarried babies must be resolved first. Thus, during the Ancestor Ceremony, these unborn baby Shin are transformed anew into the complete form of a young child. At this present time, by a divine gift, a palace called Cloud Palace was bestowed at the entrance of heaven, allowing ancestor Shin to escape their suffering on earth and live there in peace. This provides a way for votaries practicing the faith of the New Heavens era to resolve issues with ancestor Shin. This ceremony of enshrining ancestor Shin in the Cloud Palace is called the Ancestor Ceremony. The Ancestor Ceremony is totally different from Sending to Paradise ceremony, a ritual commonly performed to guide the souls of the deceased to paradise. Many people request the sending to paradise ceremony with the sole intention of properly honoring their ancestors. But paradise and nirvana are places that cannot be reached without heaven's approval. Therefore, human Shin, like ancestor Shin, cannot ascend to heaven. This was the case even in the betrayal heaven era, but the new heaven especially does not accept human Shin. Since humans have done nothing for heaven while alive, heaven has no reason to accept them. Therefore, the belief that one is reincarnated in paradise after death is something made up and is not true. Before sending them to a good place, first and foremost, if the human Shin died from an illness, you must heal that illness. If the human Shin lost their limbs in an accident, you must reattach their limbs to restore them to a complete condition. This is because when a person dies from an illness or accident, their Shin continues to exist in that same state. Additionally, if their clothes are old and worn, they need to be dressed in new clothes. But these should be spiritual garments, not worldly ones. Nevertheless, performing such acts without this knowledge goes against the heavenly laws and is therefore a wrongdoing. From the perspective of the ancestor Shin, being promised a good place but not being sent there causes their resentment and anger to turn into bad karma, which then directly affects those who made the promise. The ancestor ceremony, to fully resolve the ancestor Shin, is the only salvation for deceased human Shin. Ancestor Shin, who have undergone the ancestor ceremony, are reborn as healthy human Shin, each according to their needs. They live in the cloud palace, free from the invasion of evil Shin, and are able to eat and live safely and freely. There, the ancestor Shin pray for their descendants to achieve righteous faith and Tao. Thanks to the devotion of one descendant, the ancestors, from generation to generation, are eternally saved. As I have studied Shin, I have directly dealt with evil Shin that harms people and taught others how to fight and overcome them on their own. However, no further progress could be made without addressing the issues with the ancestor Shin. Therefore, it is necessary to perform the ancestor ceremony, and this can only be requested by the descendants. At this present time, heaven has granted permission for the ancestor ceremony on earth, which is only possible with authorization. Heaven has no reason to accept the deceased human Shin and has never promised to do so. Therefore, until now, it has been impossible for humans to send the Shin of their deceased ancestors to a good place by their own ability. Heaven has granted permission for the ancestor ceremony because the Shin of the deceased hide within the bodies of their living descendants, causing negative effects due to their bad karma. This is to ensure that the votaries of the new heaven are not affected by these repercussions. Through the ancestor ceremony, a paradise called Cloud Palace has been provided for the ancestor Shin, hiding within the bodies of their descendants, allowing them to live there eternally. Thankfully, those who have come seeking to know the true heaven have been granted the benefit of living without negative impacts from ancestor Shin. This is the grace, blessing, and divine gift bestowed by the new heaven.